Hello guys, welcome to Online Web Tutor presented by Profotech Solutions team. I am Sanjay. We are learning CodeIgniter Framework Beginners tutorial. This is our part number 37. Inside this video session guys, we are going to discuss about file helper in CodeIgniter. And also guys, if you are a beginner to the channel, then please don't forget to subscribe and keep watching our previous video sessions to get the clear concept about CodeIgniter Framework tutorial. So basically guys, in our previous video session we had discussed about how can we validate CAPTCHA in our form. So inside this video we are going to use some of the functions provided by file helper in CodeIgniter. By the help of file helper, we basically read a file, write a file, delete file, list all the files inside folder, and if you want to read all the properties like size, MI type and several properties of a file, so all these functions available inside this file helper. So basically inside this video we are going to use some of the functions like here: read file, write file, delete files, get file names, get dir file info and get file info. Basically file helper provides several functions. These are the random functions we have picked to learn inside this video. To use all these functions, firstly we have to load file helper in our application. So back to editor, and let's say that we are going to declare a route to actually apply file helper functions inside this route. So let's say my file. Inside here we are going to use same controller, something called learn helpers, and inside here let's say that my file underscore helper. If I save this file, copy this method name, open up our controller, back here, and let's say that function, this is our function name. Now inside this function, firstly to use all the functions of file helper, firstly we need to load that. So let's say this load, and we are going to load something called file helper. Now by loading this helper, now we can access all these functions what basically we have written. The first function, basically what it says, read file. It means that we have a file, inside that file we have some content, and if we want to read we are going to use this function. So back to folder structure. Now let's say that I am going to make a folder, something called files. Inside this files folder I am going to make a file, and let's say that sample.txt. Now inside this file, let's say that we are going to write some message. So let's say hi all, welcome to online web tutor. So this is the statement that we have written inside the sample.txt file. Now what basically we are going to use, by using this read file function we are going to read the content from the file what we have created. So back to editor. Now firstly let's say that file underscore path, at what path basically we have stored our file. So at root, inside that root we have a folder something called files. At files folder we have a file something called sample.txt. Now we are going to read this file. So let's say that read file. So for that we are going to use something called read file function of file helper. So inside this read file only we have to pass our file path with the file name, and let's just store all the contents of this file inside a variable. Let's say that file underscore contents, and finally I am going to make use of print r to print all the data from the file. So let's say print r file contents. So if I save this file, copy this route, back to browser. Now let's say that index.php and route name. Now this is the content we have written inside our file. So basically by using this read file function we can actually access all the contents from the file. But nowadays this function is deprecated. In place of this function, which basically function we have to use the function something called if I comment this line, or before comment if I make this copy and paste, and the function we need to use something called file get contents. If I reload this page, in the same way it works, but this function is now deprecated. Now let's say that while reading this file, we want to add, or let's say we want to update all the contents of the file from our new updated content. So let's say that if I make comment this line, go here and let's say that updated content, and I'm going to update, let's say, hey, this is all about CodeIgniter tutorial. Now I want to update the file contents with this updated content. So how can we do that? So for that, we are going to use the function something called write file. But before that, we have to make sure that our file has write permission. So if I back to our terminal, now this file has no write permission. So firstly we need to keep that. So if I copy this path, go inside this terminal, and this is the path. Now inside this path, I am going to enable the read write mode, and successfully I have given that. So back to our editor, let's say that we are going to make use of called write file. Inside this write file, the first parameter we have to pass the file path, including our file name. Now inside the second content, inside the second we have to pass the content. So I'm going to pasting it here, and also let's say that echo, we are going to store a variable, let's say write status. Now if I echo here, let's echo write status. So when the write function basically writes all the contents inside this file, it will return the boolean value. If it returns true value, it means that successfully we have written all the contents inside that file. So if I save this file, go to browser, reload this page, now it returns one value. It means that true value. So back to folder structure, open up this file. Now as we can see that inside this file, all the contents what we have supplied here all written there. This is all about the function something called write file. Now what basically delete files do? The name clear is that if we want to delete several files from a folder, we can make use of delete files. Let's say that inside this folder, or also before delete files, if suppose that if you go to editor, now let's say that we want to write all these contents inside a file, and this file does not exist inside this folder. If it not exist, it automatically creates a new file with this name. So if I save this file, back to browser, reload this page, now as we can see that here we have some error, and error is that file get contents not find this path. Obviously, because to use we have to make comment of this line, because we are going to write inside this file. So back to browser, reload this page, go to folder structure. Now this is the file that we have created. Now inside this folder we have two files. We want to delete all these two files from this files folder. So how can we basically delete all these files from this folder? So for that we need to use called delete_files. So back to editor. Now let's say that I'm going to comment all these lines, and I'm going to use something called, instead of this file path, get rid of that, and let's say delete_files. Inside this only we need to pass the folder path. If I echo, save this, back here, reload this page, returns one value. It means that successfully we have deleted all the files from this folder, as we can see. Now if we back to our slide, the next function basically provides all the file names basically a folder contains. Let's say that if we back to our root folder, inside this application, inside this controllers, as we can see that there are various files inside this folder. So let's say we want to detect, or we want to calculate, we want to print all the file names inside this controllers by using this function. So how can we use that? Back to our editor, let's say that echo, or let's say print r all underscore files. Inside this variable I'm going to store all files, get underscore file names, and inside this function we have to pass our folder path name. From that folder we are going to read all the files. So application, inside this application folder we have to go inside controllers. So let's say controllers. If I save this file, back to browser, reload this page, now all these files we can see inside controllers folder. If I make some formatting, so let's say echo PRE tag, save this file, reload this page, now all the files basically inside our controller. Now inside of controller, if we type something config folder, now inside this config folder all the files we have something called profiler, config, something called 15th file we have inside our config folder. Now let's say that instead of these printing the file names, we want to print all the file details of each file individually, like its name, its size and several attributes. So what basically function we have to use? The next function will come into action. If I copy this function name, back to editor, and let's say that get dir file info instead of get file info. So instead of, let's say copy and paste this line, comment here, pasting it here. Now get dir file info list all the files available inside this folder, as well as it lists all the properties associated with each file. Back to our browser, reload this page. Now as we can see that this is the file. Inside this file, this is the name, this is the path, this is size, date created and relative path. All the properties are associated with each file individually, as we can see here. Now next function, basically if we want to read a specific file from this list, means we don't want to list all these files property. We basically want to read only this config.php. So how can we use that? Back to slide, copy this function name, back to editor. Now if I copy and paste this line, comment this line, and instead of config we want to read only this config.php file, and instead of this function, if I replace with this, save this file, back to browser, reload this page, now all these details basically config.php. Now inside this video guys, we had discussed about file helpers function. So inside this video session guys, if you have any doubt, then please drop your comment. I will give my reply as soon as possible. So for this video session guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day.